Ever had that neighbor who thinks they own everything? Well, imagine coming home to find someone literally trying to claim your land. That's exactly what happened when my HOA president decided my property lines were more like suggestions. But boy, did she learn a hard lesson about messing with the wrong homeowner. Moving to Cedar Grove was supposed to be my fresh start. After years of saving, I finally bought my dream home. A beautiful 2-story house with a big backyard, perfect for my golden retriever Max. The neighborhood looked exactly like those peaceful suburbs you see in movies, with neat houses and friendly faces. At least, that's what I thought until I met Sarah Johnson, the HOA president. I was still unpacking boxes in my driveway when she first appeared. Sarah walked up with what I now know was her fake smile, wearing an expensive blazer that seemed too formal for a Saturday morning. "Welcome to Cedar Grove," she said, holding out a welcome packet that was thicker than a phone book. "I'm Sarah Johnson, the president of our homeowners association. We're so excited to have someone new in the neighborhood." At first, Sarah seemed helpful, maybe a bit too helpful. She kept pointing out things about my property while we talked. "Oh, you know that tree line marks the border of your lot, or the previous owners had some confusion about where their land ended." Looking back, I should have noticed how she lingered near my property markers, how her eyes scanned my yard like she was memorizing every inch. The first strange incident happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. I came home from work early one day and found Sarah in my side yard with a measuring tape. She jumped when she saw me, quickly stuffing the tape measure into her designer handbag. "Oh, hello. I was just admiring your landscaping," she said, but her face turned red. I nodded politely, but something felt off. Who measures landscaping they're just admiring? Then my next-door neighbor, Tom, gave me a heads-up that changed everything. "Watch out for Sarah," he warned while we were both getting our mail. "She's been trying to redraw property lines ever since she became HOA president. The Williams family 2 streets over almost lost part of their backyard to her schemes last year." I thanked Tom for the warning, thinking maybe he was exaggerating. He wasn't. The next morning, I found Sarah and 2 other HOA board members standing at the edge of my front yard. They had papers spread out on a clipboard, pointing and discussing something. When they saw me watching through my window, they scattered like teenagers caught somewhere they shouldn't be. That afternoon, I noticed some of my property markers looked different, like someone had tried to move them. Things got really weird when I started my fence project. I'd gotten all the proper permits and had the property lines professionally surveyed. The day the fence company came to start work, Sarah marched over with a stack of papers. "Excuse me," she said in that sugary sweet voice that didn't match her angry eyes, "but you're putting the fence in the wrong place. According to HOA records, your property line is 3 feet back." I politely showed her my survey documents and permits, but she wouldn't even look at them. "Those must be incorrect," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Our HOA maps show something completely different." When I asked to see these supposed maps, she said they were confidential HOA documents that she couldn't share. That evening, I found a bright orange violation notice stuck to my door. It claimed I was encroaching on community property and needed to cease all construction immediately. The letter wasn't official. It was printed on regular paper with the HOA logo clearly copied and pasted. Sarah wasn't even trying to hide that she was behind it. I decided to do some digging and talk to more neighbors. Turns out Sarah had a history of this behavior. She'd tried to claim parts of other people's properties for community improvements before, but most people gave in to avoid conflict. She'd successfully bullied 3 other homeowners into changing their fence lines or giving up parts of their yards for supposed easements. The final straw came when I caught her on my property again, this time actually trying to move one of my survey markers. She didn't see me filming with my phone as she kicked at the metal stake, trying to loosen it from the ground. When I cleared my throat, she spun around with a look of pure shock on her face. "Oh, I was just checking if these markers were secure," she said, like that was a totally normal thing for an HOA president to do. I realized then that being nice wasn't going to work. Sarah wasn't just an overeager HOA president. She was actively trying to steal parts of my property. As I watched her hurry away in her expensive heels, I decided it was time to fight back. If Sarah wanted to play games with property lines, she was about to learn she'd picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. Sarah's attempts to claim my property would get much more aggressive, but she had no idea what kind of evidence I was about to start collecting. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them think they're winning, right until you show everyone exactly what they've been doing. After catching Sarah trying to move my property markers, things started getting nasty. Instead of confronting me directly, she began spreading rumors throughout Cedar Grove. At first, it was small things, whispers at the grocery store about how I was difficult to work with or didn't understand community values. But soon, the lies got bigger and more ridiculous. One morning, while walking Max, I overheard two women talking in their driveway. "Did you hear?" one whispered, not realizing I was within earshot. "Sarah says he forged his property documents. Apparently, the real ones show his land ends at the oak tree." I wanted to laugh. The oak tree they were talking about was smack in the middle of my backyard. But Sarah's lies were clearly working. People started giving me strange looks when I walked by. The HOA meetings became a nightmare. I started attending them after Tom warned me that Sarah was using them to badmouth me. Sure enough, at every meeting, she'd bring up concerns about property line violations in my area. She never mentioned me by name. She was too clever for that. Instead, she'd talk about certain new residents who were disrespecting community guidelines. The violation notices kept coming, each one more official-looking than the last. They started showing up twice a week, warning me about imaginary infractions, improper fence placement, unauthorized landscaping, violation of community boundary standards. I kept every single one, starting a file that would later prove very useful. Then other board members joined in on Sarah's game. Her right-hand man, Mike Peterson, started parking his car right at the edge of my driveway every morning, taking pictures with his phone. When I asked what he was doing, he claimed he was documenting code violations. Another board member, Linda, would walk her tiny dog right through my yard, claiming it was HOA access space. The threatening letters started arriving next. They weren't official HOA notices anymore. These were typed notes left in my mailbox, warning me that things would get difficult if I didn't cooperate with community standards. One even suggested that the HOA might have to take legal action about my property lines. They weren't signed, but Sarah's fancy letterhead paper was pretty obvious. Things got even weirder when I discovered Sarah was digging into my past. My coworker, who lived in Cedar Grove, told me Sarah had been asking around about my job, my family, even my credit history. She was trying to build some kind of case against me, claiming I couldn't afford the property and must have cheated to get it. The real shock came when my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, showed me pictures from 3 years ago. They showed Sarah pulling the exact same stunts with a family who used to live in my house. She'd harassed them about their property lines until they finally sold the place and moved away. That's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines. This was Sarah's way of controlling the neighborhood. One evening, I came home to find several HOA board members in a little group near my front yard. They scattered when they saw me, but left behind a stack of papers they'd been looking at. I picked them up and couldn't believe what I saw. They were fake surveys, drawings that showed my property line cutting right through my garage. Sarah was actually trying to claim part of my house was on community property. The next day, bright orange stakes appeared along what Sarah claimed was my real property line. They cut through my front yard, through my garden, and even through the corner of my garage. A notice was attached to each stake. Notice of true property boundary. Structures beyond this line must be removed. It was like living in a bad dream. Sarah started holding impromptu HOA meetings in her driveway, right where she knew I could hear every word. She'd talk loudly about how some people were stealing from the community and how she was working on a solution. Her little group of supporters would nod along, shooting dirty looks at my house. When I checked my mailbox that evening, I found an official-looking envelope. Inside was a letter threatening legal action if I didn't voluntarily comply with their property line corrections. The letter demanded that I remove my fence, relocate my garden, and pay for a community-approved survey. It was signed by Sarah and the entire HOA board. That letter was the last straw. I'd been patient, collected evidence, and tried to handle things peacefully. But now they were threatening legal action based on completely fabricated claims. What Sarah didn't know was that while she was busy spreading lies and making threats, I'd been quietly building an airtight case against her and the HOA board. As I sat at my kitchen table that night, looking at the growing file of evidence I'd collected, I knew it was time to stop playing defense. Sarah wanted to talk about property lines. Fine, but she was about to learn that I had something she didn't prove. Real, solid, undeniable proof of everything she'd been doing. The time for being nice was over. After getting that threatening letter, I knew I needed solid proof of everything. My first step was installing security cameras. Not just cheap ones, but good quality cameras that could record clear video day and night. I put them up all around my property, making sure they covered every angle where Sarah and her friends kept showing up. The cameras started paying off immediately. The very next morning, they caught Mike Peterson sneaking around my yard at 6 a.m., trying to move one of my property markers again. But this time, I had it all on video, clear as day, showing him actually tampering with the survey stake. That was just the beginning of what my cameras would catch. I decided to go big and hired Bob Thompson, the most respected property surveyor in our county. He wasn't cheap, but he was known for being incredibly thorough. Bob spent an entire day measuring every inch of my property. He brought all kinds of professional equipment and even used GPS to mark the exact boundaries. Sarah watched from her window the whole time, probably realizing this wasn't going to be good for her. The survey results were exactly what I expected. Every single one of my property markers was in the right place. Bob provided me with official documents, detailed maps, and even photographs showing the true property lines. He also noted in his report that some markers showed signs of being tampered with, which was a serious legal issue. Next, I went to the county records office. The clerk there, Mary, was super helpful when I explained my situation. She helped me find every single document related to my property going back 30 years. Property deeds, surveys, sale records, everything. Each document showed the exact same property lines I'd been claiming all along. Mary even notarized copies of everything, so they'd hold up legally. I started recording every single interaction with Sarah and other board members. My phone was always ready to record video whenever they approached. I kept a detailed diary too, writing down dates, times, and exactly what happened during each incident. Sometimes Sarah would say something threatening thinking I wasn't recording, but my phone caught it all. The real gold mine came when previous homeowners started contacting me. After hearing about my situation, 5 different families reached out to share their experiences with Sarah. They all had similar stories. Sarah had tried to claim parts of their property, harassed them about boundaries, and made their lives miserable. Better yet, they had proof, old emails, letters, and even videos showing Sarah pulling the same tricks. One former resident, David Wilson, still had all the threatening letters Sarah had sent him 3 years ago. They were almost identical to the ones I was getting now. Same fake letterhead, same threats, same demands. He let me make copies of everything and signed a statement describing how Sarah had harassed him until he finally sold his house. I also discovered something interesting about the HOA's own documents. Their official maps, the ones Sarah kept referencing but wouldn't show anyone, they actually proved my case. After making friends with Jenny, the HOA secretary who was tired of Sarah's schemes, I got copies of the real HOA maps. They showed my property lines exactly where I said they were. My lawyer, Steve Martinez, helped me organize all the evidence into a clear case. We had everything. Videos of Sarah and her friends trespassing and tampering with property markers, proof that their surveys were fake, documentation showing the real property lines, statements from previous residents, and records of every single threatening letter and false violation notice they'd sent. The security cameras kept catching more evidence every day. One night, they recorded Sarah and Linda actually measuring my driveway and discussing how they could claim part of it as community property. Another time, they caught Mike taking down my private property signs. Every incident went into my growing file of evidence. I even set up a trail camera hidden in a tree, the kind hunters use, that caught Sarah sneaking onto my property at dawn, placing new stakes where she wanted my property line to be. The photos were crystal clear, showing her in the act of trying to change my property boundaries. It was the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sarah's former friend on the HOA board, Patricia, came to me with a bombshell. She had emails from Sarah outlining her whole plan to claim parts of various properties in the neighborhood. Sarah had called it her community improvement initiative, but the emails made it clear she was trying to bully people into giving up parts of their land. By the end of 2 weeks, I had a solid case that no one could argue with, 3 different surveys proving my property lines were correct, security camera footage showing Sarah and her friends trespassing and tampering with markers, dozens of witness statements from current and former residents, official county records confirming my property boundaries, copies of every fake violation notice and threatening letter they'd sent. Looking at all the evidence spread out on my dining room table, I knew I had everything I needed. Sarah had spent months trying to bully me, thinking I would eventually give in like others had. Instead, I'd built an airtight case showing exactly what she and her HOA friends had been doing. Now it was time for the final step, presenting all this evidence at the next HOA board meeting. Sarah had no idea what was coming. She thought she was going to another regular meeting where she could bully and threaten people. Instead, she was walking into a trap of her own making, and every piece of evidence I'd gathered was going to prove exactly what kind of person she really was. The evening of the HOA board meeting, I arrived early with 3 thick folders of evidence. Sarah was at the front of the room, arranging her papers and chatting with board members like it was just another meeting. She barely glanced at me when I walked in, probably thinking I was there to hear more of her threats about my property lines. I waited patiently through the usual meeting stuff, budget reports, garden club updates, all the boring HOA business. Then Sarah got to her favorite topic, property line compliance issues. She started her usual speech about how certain residents were causing problems. That's when I stood up. "Actually, Sarah," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'd like to address the property line issue." The room went completely quiet. Sarah's fake smile flickered for a second, but she probably thought she could handle whatever I was about to say. "Of course," she said sweetly. "We always welcome community input." I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "I've got some interesting footage to share," I announced. The first video started playing. Crystal clear security camera footage showing Sarah and Mike sneaking around my yard at dawn, moving property markers. You could hear gasps from the audience. Sarah jumped up. "This is inappropriate. We need to move on a dash," but I kept going. "I've got lots more to share," I said calmly, "like these emails you sent to previous homeowners." I clicked to the next slide, showing her threatening messages to David Wilson and others. Sarah's face was getting redder by the second. Then came the official survey documents, the county records, and statements from previous residents. With each piece of evidence, Sarah's face got paler. Other board members started moving away from her, realizing they were witnessing her schemes falling apart. The real shock came when I played the audio recordings of Sarah threatening me and other homeowners. Her own voice filled the room, talking about making people's lives difficult if they didn't cooperate. Linda, her closest ally on the board, actually got up and walked out. She couldn't deny what she was hearing. "This is all taken out of context," Sarah suddenly shouted. Standing up, "I was protecting our community, But I wasn't done. I showed the trail camera photos of her planting fake property markers, the videos of her measuring people's yards without permission, and the fake violation notices she'd been sending out. The final blow was the testimony from Patricia, Sarah's former friend. Patricia stood up right there in the meeting and confirmed everything. How Sarah had planned to bully residents into giving up parts of their property, how she forged documents, how she'd organized a harassment campaign. Sarah completely lost it. "You're all ungrateful," she screamed, her perfect HOA president image totally shattered. "I built this community. I protected our property values." She grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the door, but stopped for one last dramatic moment. "This isn't over," she yelled, then slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. The room was silent for about 3 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Board members were apologizing to me. Homeowners were sharing their own stories about Sarah's bullying. And someone even started a motion to remove her as HOA president immediately. Within a week, Sarah resigned from the board. She sent a short email claiming she was stepping down for personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The new board, led by Tom from next door, immediately started fixing the damage she'd caused. They confirmed all the proper property lines and apologized to everyone Sarah had harassed. The best part? Sarah put her house up for sale a month later. I heard she moved to a condo in the city. No HOA, ironically. Some of the neighbors organized a party the day her moving truck left. Nobody missed her fake smiles or threatening letters. Life in Cedar Grove is pretty great now. The new HOA board actually helps people instead of harassing them. Property lines are respected, and nobody has to worry about finding strange people measuring their yard at dawn. Sometimes new residents ask about the crazy HOA president who tried to steal people's land, but it's becoming just a neighborhood legend. I still have all the evidence safely stored away, just in case. The security cameras stay up too. They're good for spotting wildlife in the backyard now, instead of trespassing HOA presidents. Max enjoys his walks without Linda's tiny dog trying to claim parts of our yard as community property. Yesterday, I ran into Patricia at the grocery store. She told me Sarah tried to join another HOA board in her new neighborhood, but they'd heard about her Cedar Grove adventures and turned her down flat. Apparently, her reputation for property line schemes had followed her. As I sit in my backyard now, enjoying the peace and quiet, I can't help but smile. My property lines are exactly where they should be. My fence stands undisturbed, and my security cameras only catch squirrels and birds. Sometimes standing up to a bully isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone else they might target too. The oak tree that Sarah tried to claim was outside my property line provides nice shade while I read in the backyard. Every now and then, I look at the original threatening letters she sent me, just to remind myself that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to gather evidence and wait for the perfect moment to show everyone exactly who they really are.